Father and son reunion. The day Steve Harvey stopped the show. What you're about to witness will restore your faith in humanity and remind you that some stories are so powerful they transcend entertainment to become something sacred. This is the extraordinary true account of the day Steve Harvey abandoned his role as game show host to become a bridge between a hero and the life he saved, proving that gratitude never forgets and love always finds its way home. You'll see the exact moment when Family Feud transformed from a television show into a miracle, when 40 years of separation dissolved in a single embrace, and when America remembered what real heroism looks like. This isn't just another heartwarming game show moment. This is the story that made an entire nation stop what they were doing and call the people they loved. Picture the Family Feud studio on what was supposed to be an ordinary Friday afternoon taping in Atlanta, Georgia. The lights glow with their familiar warmth, casting that perfect television ambiance that has made millions of families feel welcome in their living rooms. 300 audience members fill every seat, their excited chatter, creating the soundtrack for another episode of America's favorite family game show. You're looking at Steve Harvey commanding the stage in his signature style. Perfectly tailored suit, megawatt smile, that infectious energy that has made him beloved across America. The cameras are positioned to capture every laugh, every celebration, every moment of joy that viewers have come to expect from their daily dose of Family Feud entertainment. This is supposed to be Heroes Week, a special celebration of ordinary Americans who have performed extraordinary acts of courage and selflessness. The theme promises inspiring stories, but nothing too dramatic, just the kind of uplifting content that makes families feel good about gathering around their television screens. But you're about to witness something that will shatter every expectation about what can happen when the cameras start rolling and real life collides with television magic. Watch as a quiet middle-aged truck driver from Dayton, Ohio, named Thomas Riley, steps up to the podium. At first glance, he looks completely out of place among the week's other contestants: firefighters, paramedics, nurses, and military veterans. His application letter to the producers had been unusually brief, containing just one mysterious line: "My hero is a man I've never met." You can see the slight tremor in his hands as he grips the podium, the way his eyes scan the audience as if searching for someone who isn't there. The producers found his letter poetic and intriguing, but they had no idea what those 9 words truly meant or what they were about to unleash on live television. Steve greets him with his usual upbeat enthusiasm, that natural warmth that makes contestants feel instantly at ease. "All right, now, Mr. Riley, tell me something good. Who's here playing with you today?" Watch Thomas's response carefully. You'll notice the polite but distant smile, the slight shake in his voice as he introduces his wife, Sarah, his 23-year-old daughter, Jennifer, his son-in-law, Michael, and his young niece, Emma. His voice carries something heavy when he adds, "And the hero I wrote about, that's a long story, Mr. Harvey." The audience chuckles good-naturedly, assuming he's just nervous about being on television. But notice Steve's reaction, how his experienced host instincts pick up something deeper in Thomas's tone, a weight that doesn't belong on a game show stage. You're watching the first 3 rounds proceed exactly as expected. Survey questions about everyday topics, bursts of laughter, family banter, and strategic gameplay. Thomas participates with quiet competence, his answers revealing a thoughtful man who chooses his words carefully. But pay attention to the moments between questions. How his eyes drift toward the studio doors, how he touches his shirt pocket protectively, how he carries himself like someone bearing an invisible burden. During the commercial break before the final round, something extraordinary happens behind the scenes. You can't see it yet, but one of the producers is whispering urgently into Steve's earpiece. "Steve, the contestant wrote you a personal note. He says if there's time, he'd like to read it on air. It's something special." When the cameras roll again, watch Steve make the decision that will change everything. Instead of launching into the final round, he turns toward Thomas with that intuitive compassion that has made him more than just an entertainer. Now, Mr. Riley, you mentioned earlier that you wrote a note about your hero. You mind telling us what that's about? See Thomas take that deep breath, the way his hand trembles slightly as he reaches into his shirt pocket and unfolds a piece of paper that's been creased and refolded so many times the edges are soft with wear. The studio falls into complete silence. Even the band members stop shuffling their music sheets. Listen carefully to what happens next, because you're about to hear one of the most powerful stories ever told on television. My hero, Thomas begins, his voice barely steady, is the man who saved my life in 1983. I was 6 years old when a house fire took everything. Our home, my mother, my little sister. But a neighbor ran inside that burning house and carried me out. He disappeared before the firefighters arrived. I never even knew his name. Watch Steve's face transform as the words sink in. His usual bright demeanor fades into something much more profound. The expression of a man recognizing that he's witnessing something sacred. Thomas continues, his voice gaining strength as the words pour out. I grew up believing that man died that night trying to save my family. All these years I've wanted to thank him, but I never could. 2 months ago, through a newspaper article about the anniversary of the fire, I learned he might still be alive. The pause that follows is electric with possibility. That's why I'm here today. I asked Family Feud to help me find him. You can hear the collective intake of breath from 300 audience members as they realize they're witnessing something far beyond entertainment. This isn't a game show anymore. This is a prayer being answered in real time. Steve looks toward the side of the stage, and you'll notice something extraordinary in his expression. He knows something the audience doesn't know yet. His producer nods, almost imperceptibly from the wings. Thomas, Steve says, his voice gentler than you've ever heard it. What if I told you that sometimes when you need a miracle most, one walks right through those doors? Watch Thomas frown in confusion, his mind unable to process what Steve might be suggesting. The possibility is too enormous, too impossible to believe. Steve gestures toward the large double doors at the side of the stage, his own voice thick with emotion. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. William Carter. This is the moment that will be replayed millions of times, the moment that will make grown men cry and remind families across America what love looks like. The doors open slowly, and an elderly African-American man in his 70s steps into the bright studio lights. Watch his careful, deliberate steps across the stage. See how his weathered hands clutch something against his chest. A faded red work shirt that holds secrets 40 years in the making. Notice the way the audience gasps collectively, hundreds of people recognizing they're witnessing something miraculous. Thomas staggers backward, his hand flying to cover his mouth as the impossible becomes reality. 40 years of wondering, of guilt, of dreams about a thank you he thought he'd never get to say. All of it crystallizing in this single moment of recognition. Mr. Carter, Steve says softly, his own voice betraying the emotion he's fighting to contain, is the man who saved a little boy from a burning house in Dayton, Ohio, on March 15th. You're watching Thomas cover his face as 4 decades of pain, gratitude, and disbelief overwhelm him completely. William Carter continues his careful walk across the stage, each step heavy with the weight of memory and the miracle of this impossible reunion. I never thought I'd see you again, the old man says, his voice low but carrying clearly through the hushed studio. I've watched this show every night for years, but I never expected to walk onto it myself. This is the moment that stops time itself. The two men meet in the center of the stage, and for a heartbeat that lasts forever, neither moves. They simply look at each other. The man who saved a life and the life he saved. Separated by 40 years but connected by a bond that death and time could never break. Then Thomas drops the piece of paper from his trembling hands, and it flutters to the studio floor like a released prayer, as he wraps his arms around the man who gave him a second chance at life. The embrace is everything: grief for what was lost, gratitude for what was saved, and love for the connection that never truly broke. Watch the audience rise as 300 people, understanding they're witnessing something holy. The applause swells like a wave of human emotion, not the performative cheering of a game show, but the spontaneous outpouring of hearts, recognizing truth and beauty. Steve Harvey, the man who has kept his composure through thousands of shows and every conceivable surprise, sets his microphone down and turns away from the cameras, wiping his eyes as his own emotional walls crumble in the face of such profound human connection. When the thunderous applause finally subsides, Steve returns to center stage, his voice husky with emotion. He's no longer trying to hide. "Now, Mr. Carter, tell me, why'd you run into that house that night?" Listen to the answer that will remind you what heroism really means. "I was driving home from a double shift at the factory. I saw flames shooting out the windows. I didn't think about it. I just heard a boy screaming inside." You don't think about your own safety when you hear a child calling for help. Thomas nods through his tears, finding his voice again. "My mom and my little sister didn't make it out," he says softly. "But because of you, Mr. Carter, I got to grow up. I got to get married, have my own children. You didn't just save me, sir. You saved my whole family that came after me." You're watching an entire studio of people openly sobbing now. 300 strangers united in their recognition of love's power to transcend time and tragedy. Steve places one protective hand on each man's shoulder, creating a circle of connection that encompasses everyone present. "Sometimes," Steve says, his voice carrying the weight of profound truth, "life brings us back around full circle so we can finish what was started 40 years ago. This right here, this is what Family Feud is really about. Not the competition, not the prizes, but the connections that remind us we're all family." The cameras pan across the audience, capturing faces streaming with tears, people standing in reverent applause, some bowed in silent prayer. This isn't entertainment anymore. This is a congregation witnessing the sacred. Watch as Thomas's daughter Jennifer walks forward, carrying a small wooden box with ceremonial care. Her own voice trembles with emotion as she speaks. "Mr. Carter, our entire family wanted to give you this as a symbol of what you gave us, the freedom to live, to love, to keep going." Inside the box is a carefully folded American flag, and as William Carter accepts it with shaking hands, you can see 40 years of wondering if his actions mattered, finally receiving their answer. "I never thought anybody remembered," he whispers, his voice breaking. "I never knew if what I did made any difference." Steve leans closer, his own heart clearly moved beyond his ability to maintain professional distance. "People remember, sir. Sometimes it just takes 40 years for the thank you to find its way home. But you're about to witness the moment that will leave not a single dry eye in America." Mr. Carter opens the faded red work shirt he's been clutching against his chest, and pinned carefully inside the breast pocket is a small, melted fragment of metal and plastic. "I kept this," he says, his voice barely audible, but carrying clearly through the absolute silence. "Found it in the rubble that night after the fire department finished. Didn't know whose it was, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. Something told me to keep it." Thomas gasps audibly, recognition flooding his face. That's mine. That's my little red car. My mom gave it to me for my 6th birthday, just 2 weeks before the fire. I was playing with it when the flames started." You're watching the final piece of a 40-year puzzle click into place, the moment when fate reveals that some connections are stronger than death, time, or the cruel randomness of tragedy. The studio lights seem to shimmer through the tears on both faces, as they realize they've been connected all along by this small token of a little boy's innocence. Steve steps back, motioning to his camera crew, with the kind of authority that comes from recognizing a moment bigger than television. "No more game today," he says quietly. "We're not playing for money anymore. We're playing for memory, for healing, for the kind of love that never dies." The audience responds with applause that's softer now, less about noise and more about reverence. the sound of hearts acknowledging they've witnessed something that will change them forever. For the remainder of what was supposed to be a game show, Steve simply lets the two men talk. You'll watch their conversation unfold like two halves of one unfinished story finally reconnecting after 4 decades of separation. Thomas shares his memories of the nightmares that followed the fire, the survivor's guilt, the way he grew up feeling both blessed and haunted by his rescue. William speaks about his own burden, the guilt he carried for not being able to save everyone, the nights he lay awake wondering about the little boy he pulled from the flames, the way he carried that melted toy car as a reminder that sometimes the best we can do isn't enough to save everyone, but it's enough to save someone. Their conversation flows with the honesty that can only exist between two people who have shared the deepest kind of human experience. The moment when one person's courage determines whether another person lives or dies. Viewers later described it as the most authentic television moment they had ever witnessed. The kind of programming that reminds you why stories matter and why human connection is the most important thing we have. When the show officially ends, Steve addresses not just the studio audience, but the millions of viewers watching at home. Folks, we talk about heroes all the time in this country, but most heroes don't wear capes or make speeches or get their names in the paper. They just do the right thing when the moment calls for it, and then they go on with their lives. And sometimes, if we're really lucky, the person they saved grows up to remind us all that gratitude has no expiration date, and love always finds its way home. The episode that aired 2 weeks later, under the title "The Day Steve Harvey Stopped the Show," broke every FIVE rating record for Family Feud. News outlets across the country replayed the reunion. Churches incorporated it into sermons about forgiveness and divine timing. Schools showed it in assemblies about everyday heroism and the ripple effects of kindness. Social media platforms overflowed with comments from viewers who were inspired to reconnect with people from their past, to say thank you to those who had helped them, to reach out to the quiet heroes in their own lives. The hashtag "Gratitude Never Forgets" became a movement, with millions sharing stories of their own unsung heroes. But the most beautiful part of this story isn't what happened on television. It's what happened when the cameras stopped rolling. Thomas immediately invited Mr. Carter to spend the weekend with his family in Ohio, and that visit became the beginning of a relationship that would enrich both their lives for years to come. They spent that weekend together, visiting the rebuilt neighborhood where the fire had happened, standing before the new house constructed on the foundation where tragedy and heroism had intersected 40 years earlier. Local news crews followed their journey, filming as the two men placed a single flower at the doorstep and bowed their heads in silent remembrance for those who didn't survive. A month later, Steve Harvey invited them back for a follow-up segment that showed America what healing looks like. This time, they sat side by side, smiling, comfortable in each other's presence, like family members who had been reunited after too long apart. Thomas presented Mr. Carter with a framed photograph of both families together, under a banner reading "Gratitude Never Forgets." And Steve, fighting back tears once again, ended the segment with what became his most quoted line. "Sometimes the feud isn't between families competing for prizes, it's between memory and time, between past and present, between holding on and letting go. And when gratitude wins, when love wins, when connection wins, we all win." The clip became one of the most replayed emotional television moments of the decade, but perhaps the truest legacy was quieter and more lasting. William Carter began volunteering at a local youth center, teaching fire safety and sharing his story about how ordinary people can make extraordinary differences. Thomas started speaking at schools and community centers about courage, emphasizing how everyday heroes walk among us, often unrecognized but never unimportant. They maintained their connection every single week until Mr. Carter's peaceful passing 3 years later at the age of 76. At his funeral, Thomas delivered the eulogy to a packed church, ending it with the same words Steve Harvey had spoken that day on stage. "Sometimes gratitude just takes the long way home, but it always arrives exactly when it's supposed to." For the millions of people who watched that episode, families who had tuned in, expecting 30 minutes of light-hearted entertainment, but found themselves weeping over something far more meaningful. It became a mirror showing that heroism isn't about glory or recognition. It's about the moments when humanity steps into the fire for someone else, when ordinary people make choices that save lives and change destinies. In homes across America, viewers turned off their televisions and immediately hugged the person next to them, whispering silent thank yous for the unsung heroes in their own lives. Because some stories don't end when the credits roll. They begin again in every heart that learns to recognize the sacred in the everyday, the miraculous in the mundane, and the eternal power of two simple words, thank you. This is why some television moments transcend entertainment to become testimony, why some stories reach beyond screens to touch souls, and why love, real, patient, enduring love, always finds its way home, even when it takes 40 years to get there. Watch this story, share this story, and remember that heroes walk among us every day. They don't wear capes or seek recognition. They simply choose to step into the fire when someone else needs saving. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get 40 years later to look our hero in the eye and say the words that matter most. Thank you for saving my life.